Hi everyone.
Hi again.
We're doing the Pure Worship book. We are in chapter 5. The chapter 5 was called See the Evil Detestable Things They Are Doing, from Ezekiel chapter 8 verse 9. And we're at the subheading, The Idolatrous Symbol of Jealousy. The suggestion is to read Ezekiel 8 verses 5 and 6.
This I can do from the ESV. And he said to me, Son of man, lift up your eyes now toward the north. So I lifted up my eyes toward the north. And behold, north of the altar gate in the entrance was this image of jealousy. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing, the great abominations that the house of Israel are committing here, to drive me away from my sanctuary? But you will see still greater abominations.
Paragraph reads, Ezekiel must have been shocked. At the northern gate of the temple, apostate Jews were worshipping an idolatrous symbol or image. It was perhaps a sacred pole representing Asherah, the false goddess that the Canaanites viewed as the wife of Baal. Whatever it was, those idolatrous Israelites violated the terms of their covenant with Jehovah. By giving to an image the devotion that rightfully and exclusively belonged to Jehovah, they incited God to jealousy. They provoked him to righteous anger. Just think, for over 400 years, the temple sanctuary had been associated with Jehovah's presence. But now, by bringing idolatry right into the temple area, those idolaters made Jehovah go far from his sanctuary.
What meaning does Ezekiel's vision of the symbol of jealousy have for our day? Apostate Judah certainly reminds us of Christendom. Idolatry is widespread in the churches of Christendom, which makes invalid any devotion that the people claim to give to God. Since Jehovah does not change, we can be sure that Christendom, like apostate Judah, has provoked his righteous anger. Surely Jehovah is far away from this distorted form of Christianity.
Mm-hmm. What warning lesson can we learn from those idolaters in the temple? To render exclusive devotion to Jehovah, we must flee from idolatry. We must think, I would never use images or symbols in my worship of Jehovah. But idolatry comes in various forms, some more subtle than others. One Bible reference, they don't name it, one Bible reference work puts it this way. One may think of idolatry as a metaphor for other goods, anything of value, worth, or power that becomes our ultimate concern to the exclusion of God. End of the quote. Idolatry, then, can include material possessions, money, sex, entertainment, really anything that could take first place in our lives, and thus replace the exclusive devotion that is due Jehovah. We must guard against every form of idolatry, because Jehovah has exclusive claim to our hearts and our worship.
Well, I think I can agree with them with at least twice here. One is that, yes, Jehovah does not change. His standards are always the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I can agree with them that idolatry is not always gross forms. It's not always things that we can make with our hands and bow down to.
Yeah.
It's what our heart or our mind bows down to or gives highest priority to. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the problem? The way they apply it. Who does it apply to, this idolatry?
Yeah, well, they immediately say, well, first of all, I guess they say it applies to Israel in this case.
Okay, granted.
Right? So, but at the same time, they make it sound as if this is an introduction to idolatry among Israel.
It's a late coming development.
So because, 400 years, they weren't doing it almost, it's sounding like. And then he sees this in the temple, and it forces God out of the temple.
And what's the truth?
But the truth is that they were backsliding into idolatry their whole history. Even before they were taken out of Egypt, they were idolaters.
Yeah.
And their father, Abraham, was an idolater. His children, Jacob, you've got Rachel and Leah, and they all had gods that they buried when they were going into the land. So they were all guilty of this.
So before they had a relationship with God, because this is really not about religion. You always want to make it about religion.
Mm-hmm.
But before there was a religious relationship, i.e. he made a law covenant with them,
Yeah.
they had a relationship which is not based on law or
Mhm.
obedience, because as you just pointed out, Abraham and his ancestors were idolaters.
Yeah.
God had to initiate the relationship, which he
Yeah.
later developed into a law covenant as well as a relationship.
Yeah. And actually,
you've fused these two thoughts
that's
in
right.
your mind.
He makes promises to Abraham for them before they're even born.
That's right.
Before Abraham even has a child, he makes certain promises. But we try and kind of blend the commandments given in the law
Against
with
idolatry.
the covenant
Yeah.
with Abraham as all connected. So, but there are things that God promised to the people that were for him. Not about what they did, but his promise. I'm going to do this for you. Then he tells them the law.
And the truth
But it's
is,
not dependent on that.
no, the law comes much later, 430 years later, as Paul says in Galatians.
Right.
But his relationship with them doesn't depend upon their faithfulness to him. It is his faithfulness to his covenant. They don't get it.
Yeah.
And that's why I do not change. I am Yahweh, I do not change, needs to be applied to the entire history, not just to the late developments of
Yeah.
gross idolatry in the temple.
Yeah, God has standards. Yes, we appreciate that. God wants us to worship him exclusively, wants us not to make anything an idol. Whether, it's for most people today, the idol is more likely to be these lists that they gave
But
of material things and that. But that doesn't mean. Oh, I lost my thought.
I'm sorry.
You go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
You go ahead then.
So the relationship never depends, though, on their universal compliance with his standards, because there were always some who were idolaters among them.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there were most of them who were idolaters. But at other points, it seems most of them were faithful. The era of Joshua, the era of David. But that's not the basis, though, of the relationship. The relationship of the God who does not change. And don't forget, that's in Malachi, the very last book, that he says it. The very last book of our English Old Testament. He's saying, I'm still committed to you, even if you're failing me.
Yeah.
The actual context of that Malachi reference to the God who doesn't change is they're not bringing the gifts that are suitable into his temple.
Yeah.
They're bringing spoiled goods into his temple.
Yeah. Now you said they think in terms of groups and organization instead of individuals.
That's right.
But look at here, you've got God is talking, giving this vision to an Israelite. He is part of Israel. And yet God is dealing with him
Yes.
individually.
I have not done that to any other nation, he says.
Yeah.
He picks his prophets from among this, you call them unfaithful people, but he picks his prophets from among that people.
And then they minister to their people.
Yeah.
So he doesn't get rid of them. He keeps sending prophets. He keeps showing his love to them, his grace to them.
Jeremiah says it very cutely when he says, in some translations it says literally, I kept on getting up early and sending you my prophets.
Yeah.
God's commitment was like the commitment of a mother to an alien child.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, don't you get it that you know something about the story of the patriarchs?
Mm-hmm.
You know that Rachel was hiding the family idols, even from her husband.
Mm-hmm.
You know she'd stolen them from her father's house.
Yeah.
Don't you get that at no point was either Rachel's or Jacob's relationship with Yahweh dependent or broken by those sins against his perfect standards?
Yeah.
No, you don't get it.
No.
Because they keep making pure worship the issue,
Yeah.
not God's faithfulness.
Now, this one line in here, idolatry is widespread in the churches of Christendom. I just want, that very much irritated me, at least in our experience, and we've been to a number of different denominations, and even the ones that weren't our home churches, we went to other churches.
Dozens of churches
And
several denominations.
Never did we see people bowing down to idols in church. Another thing we never saw, which was a big contrast to our witness days, was they didn't talk about themselves. The minister never got up and talked about our denomination or whatever denomination he was. They talked about Christ. They talked about God. They never focused on themselves. And yet when you go to the witnesses, and now they've even got a new brand, jw.org, that you see everywhere, that's also a symbol, I would say.
So you think if you're a witness that a cross on a church disqualifies it from being God's?
That's, at least their symbol is about an event of great significance.
That has to do with Christ.
Yes, but yours is about you.
Yeah, it's about your identity. And everything here is about your identity. It's about, the Bible is about us. The whole book really is, has that in common with all of the other books they've ever published, even if the substance has changed or even the symbolisms have been reinterpreted. What you have in every single publication going back to the beginning of Russell it's about us.
Now, if you don't think that's true, I remember, and I've told this before in the videos, but when I was still going and David wasn't, he one time said that to me, that they talk about themselves more than Jesus and Jehovah. And I was mad and didn't think that was true. And at one of the conventions, the last meeting I ever went to, I did a tally of Jehovah, Jesus, and anything that was connected with talking about themselves. So the anointed, the governing body,
faithful
the
slave,
organization, any of those kinds of phrases, I give them a mark. And they won. They won over Jehovah and Jesus.
And when Jehovah and Jesus are talked about, it's usually in reference to them supporting the organization.
Yeah.
That shows you, this is not just, as they say here, this is not just more subtle forms of idolatry. This is pretty gross, actually.
Yeah.
Everybody else except you can see it. People who look from the outside at Jehovah's Witnesses say, they seem to be talking about themselves constantly.
Yeah.
That's right.
They do. And that is idolatry. So who's guilty of idolatry?
So JW.org is only, I think, the latest development in this gross idolatry. It was subtle before, and I got to say I didn't notice it for some years until I had experienced dozens, if not hundreds, of meetings and heard the same stuff all the time, namely that unless you are part of us, you cannot be saved.
Yeah.
Well, that is an explicit transgression of what Christ said about himself. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So cults do have that in common, by the way, that they all say Christ is the way, but we are the way to the way.
Which is a form of idolatry. Jesus is the way.
So what's our link?
We have a link to a video about Rachel. Rachel, Jacob's favorite, was also a thief, a liar, and an idolater.
Ooh.
Pure worshiper or object of God's grace.
See you next time.
So, Jesus and grace. That's what you have to remember.